first, let me say thank you all for being here, taking time out of your day to learn with us. My name is Jack Towers. I work with the Agricultural Institute of Marin, or AIM, as our Farm and Food Business Resource Manager, which means I helped coordinate our technical assistance and education programming, including a series of webinars like this one, as well as some of our other small business support programs at our markets. So I'm really excited for today's presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Vince to tell you a little bit about himself, and then we'll get right into it. Oh, and let me also say there's Spanish interpretation available. I dropped a message in the chat, but you can select the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen for that. Great. With that said, I'll hand it over to Vince.
Thank you, Jack, and thanks to AIM for inviting me in to do the webinar today. We are here for food safety, water for irrigation and produce washing. And let me go ahead and introduce myself here. My name is Vince Trotter, and I work with the University of California Cooperative Extension Office in Marin County, and I have two roles there. One as the Sustainable Agriculture Coordinator, where I basically bring new practices, new ideas, new enterprises, anything really that helps our farms and ranches to adapt and change and stay in business. I'm trying to get that out there. And then I have a second role as agricultural ombuds, which means that I am a neutral, non-enforcement person that farmers and ranchers can come to with questions about rules and regulations and permits and licenses and all the bureaucracy that sometimes feels like it is designed to get in the way of producing food and feeding people. And since I work for the university, folks know that I'm not there to enforce the rules. I provide a confidential place where we can talk about almost anything. And my goal is to give you the information you need to make an informed decision about how to proceed. So if you haven't worked with cooperative extension before, know that we have offices in every county of every state. There's a little map there behind my picture with a QR code. That QR code takes you to a web page where you can find the extension office in your county and reach out to them. Every office has a different group of expertise and experts on hand. And so, if you like what you're hearing here, if you want to go deeper, I would say start by reaching out to your extension office and finding out what they have to offer. Also, a quick note, so I'll have QR codes like this throughout the presentation. You can use it to open up a resource that's related to whatever we're talking about in that moment. But I believe that Jack is going to be sending out the slides after the fact, and those QR codes will actually have the URL embedded in the code so that if you just open up the handouts, you can click on the code to open up whatever it is, the web page, the fact sheet, the additional resource to go a little deeper. So it's important to note that these are my roles with cooperative extension, but I do have one additional role that really relates to today's topic, and that is that my wife and I own and operate Kibo Farm in Santa Rosa. We grow produce, fruit and vegetables for restaurants, retailers, folks all over the Bay Area, as well as a multi-farm subscription box that is put together by a distributor that we work with. And so everything that we talk about today is relevant to me as a farmer as well. And so, there'll be times where I'll kind of share from my own experience, and there's plenty of photos throughout here that come from our place too. In fact, maybe with that hat on as a farmer, I should just put out there, I'm sort of curious to know how many of you on this webinar, when you think about food safety, you just start to break out in highs, like a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being like super chill, no problem, and 10 being like inspires panic. How does food safety make you feel? Put it in the chat. I'm just sort of curious to know where people at with their level of comfort or discomfort. Ah, okay. Six, right in the middle, but leaning towards the nervous end of things. And that you're if you're using SOPs, then Lucas, you are already ahead of the game. You're in good shape. I want to just reassure everybody. I am wearing my lucky socks for this webinar. So I think we are all going to get through this just fine and know that, I'm here as a resource going forward too. When we get to the end, I'll give you my contact info and I want you to reach out with anything that still doesn't make sense. So let's go ahead and jump into the content. We're going to have some time together here. I'll start by talking about FSMA because it is kind of what's driving a lot of the conversation around food safety on produce farms, and it shapes the kinds of practices that I'll be talking about. And I'm only going to spend a minute on FSMA. I'm going to get straight into water, and I'll start by talking about pre-harvest water, which really just means irrigation for the most part. And then we'll move into post-harvest water, which is, wash water, but it's also the water you might use for cleaning surfaces in your post-harvest area or cleaning tools. And then we'll have time for Q&A. Looks very simple, right? Four things. So let's go straight to the first one. Let's go to FSMA. And first of all, what does FSMA even stand for? It stands for the Food Safety Modernization Act. It was a comprehensive set of rules passed by the FDA about 10 years ago, and it governs the entire food chain, basically right up to the point of retail. So from production, processing, transportation, distribution, it's all covered under FSMA. And it covers everything from fruits and vegetables and produce all the way to seafood. So it's a big beast of regulations. And there is a portion of it that's just about produce. And that's where we're going to be spending our time because the focus for this webinar is on produce operations and specifically water in produce operations. Of course, when we start to talk about FSMA, oftentimes the first question people want to know is, well, where do I fit in this rule? Does it even apply to me? I'm small, or I grow melons, or, I have different qualities. Does FSMA apply to me? Unfortunately, this is a pretty complicated question to answer, and we're not going to go into it today, but there is a great flow chart put out by the folks at the National Sustainable Ag Coalition, NSAC, that walks you through a little decision tree to find out if you and your farm are under the jurisdiction of FSMA's produce rule. And so use that QR code, open up that flow chart, and find out where you fit within the regulations. The other question people ask is, well, okay, if I'm covered, if FSMA covers me and I'm sort of under its jurisdiction, what do I have to do? What does, FSMA dictate? And, the answer is that it covers a lot of things. And remember, I said that it's from everything from production all the way through processing and distribution. So when you ask what does it require of me, if we just narrow the scope down to the produce safety rule, the part of FSMA that looks at produce production, and let's imagine that you were undergoing an inspection by the folks at the FDA, there would be five things that they're looking at, basically five things on your farm that might impact the safety of your produce. So that could be things that humans are doing on the farm. It could be things that animals are doing on the farm. It could be elements of your infrastructure, your buildings and your tools and equipment. It could be stuff that you're applying to the soil that is impacting the safety of your produce. And it could include water. So five things that would be subject to the inspection. We're going to focus just on one of those, the water. And the truth is, given how much more there is to it and the fact that we aren't going to get into it, what I want to do is just give everyone the suggestion that you start by making a food safety plan. In fact, last year I got a chance to work with some folks and do a webinar with AIM about food safety planning. We talked about the food safety plan at our farm, and what FSMA requires from a food safety plan. So if you haven't done that, watch the webinar and start the process of writing one of these plans for your place, because it's really that 30,000-foot level, looking at the whole operation. And the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter where you fit with FSMA. Writing a food safety plan is a smart practice to protect your customers and protect your operation. And in fact, everything that we talk about today in relationship to water and produce safety is smart and doable, and I would suggest is good practice regardless of where you fit inside FSMA. So that's my plug for another webinar. Let's go ahead and ask the question, what does FSMA say about water? Well, basically, the rule is it's about 10 years old, but in 2024, they changed, by they, I mean the FDA, changed some of the rules specific to water within the context of a produce operation. And they made a change from an earlier approach to safety in water, which was very testing based. It was very black and white. You test the water, either you pass or you don't pass. And they've moved to a more nuanced approach that puts you, the farmer, in a position to take in the whole of the water system at your farm, assess risks, and make some decisions about what needs to happen and where the hazards lie. And it takes you well beyond just the sort of myopic view of take a sample of water, get your score, and you're done. So it's gotten maybe a little bit more complex, but I also feel like it's put you very much in the driver's seat. We're going to dig into that today. This, our conversation is only going to take us so far, though. And the folks at the UC Small Farm Food Safety Program have incredible resources on all aspects of food safety on the farm. But they specifically did a series of videos about agricultural water and food safety on the produce farm. They called it their food safety e-learning series. There's a QR code that takes you to the YouTube recordings. If what we talk about today is an appetizer, this is the feast. This is the full meal. And so I definitely recommend that you take a look at those and go deeper on anything that we aren't able to clarify for you today. So a little bit of vocabulary related to water and FSMA. First of all, you'll hear this term and you'll see it crop up, covered produce. This doesn't mean produce grown in a greenhouse or under a shade structure. This is produce that's covered by FSMA. So the produce safety rule applies to virtually all produce except for produce that they have deemed as rarely being consumed raw, right? There's not the same level of hazard if it's going to get cooked. So they have a list. It's I don't know how many, 30 different crops. You can find it online. If you're growing exclusively things on that list, then you're not growing covered produce, which means your produce is not covered by FSMA. The other thing is that if you're growing produce that is destined for processing, there's going to be a kill step baked into the whole system of turning that raw commodity into some sort of processed food product, in which case less hazard and you are no longer dealing with covered produce. So anything outside of those things that are rarely consumed raw or destined for processing is considered covered produce. Agricultural water is any water that's applied to covered produce. And that means water that is intended to or is likely to come into direct contact with that produce, which means that agricultural water includes both pre-harvest water, irrigation water, and post-harvest water. Both of those water systems entail putting water on produce. And so when you hear the term agricultural water, or you look into the rules related to agricultural water in a produce scenario, it's what you see here. And then the last thing I just wanted to distinguish, I don't know if we have folks here that grow microgreens or sprouts, but this is definitely an area of angst when we get into food safety and especially related to water. And so just to make it clear, in the eyes of FSMA, microgreens are treated like all other covered produce. Okay. So everything that we talk about today related to water and produce safety applies to microgreens. Sprouts are treated entirely differently by FSMA. They're considered a higher risk product. And so there are different expectations around how you manage the whole production cycle, including water. And those are captured in what they call Subpart M. There are resources on our website for UC Cooperative Extension in Marin. So if you're growing sprouts, the stuff we get into today, it's not going to get you there. But if you're growing microgreens, it's all good. All right, so I said that we were going to start with a brief touch on FSMA and then go straight to pre-harvest water. So let's do that. Let's start talking about what FSMA requires, but again, really what would be a good approach to managing the safety of your pre-harvest water. We're talking about irrigation for the most part here. And I think I mentioned before that FSMA used to have a very clear approach to this, which is you test the water and either the coliform count is below a certain number, in which case you're fine, or it's above a certain number, in which you're out. And they've moved away from that. We're going to get into now how you evaluate the cleanliness, the risk inherent to your irrigation water. Just something to know, when they made that change, they assigned new dates. So if you're thinking hard about FSMA and you're wondering how it's going to come home to you and your operation, well, if you're grossing more than 500,000 in food sales a year, you are already expected to be compliant with these rules around ag water. If you are, grossing somewhere between 250 and 500,000, you just came into FSMA's expectations around ag water. And if you are earning between 25 and 250,000 in total food sales per year on your farm, technically you have a year before FSMA applies to you. But as I've said a few times before, these are pretty good common sense approaches to assessing risk in the water system of your farm. There's no reason to wait. But if you're like me and sometimes you need a deadline to drive you on, so be it. Here you go. All right. So when the FDA moved away from that black and white, take a test approach, they developed a more grower-based system of evaluating risk, and they asked folks to do two steps: do a water system inspection and do a water system assessment. Now, I don't know about you, but these two words sound very similar to me. If someone knocked on my door and they said, I'm here to do an inspection on your refrigerator, bring them inside, show them my fridge. 5 minutes later, someone knocked on my door and said, I'm here to do an assessment of your refrigerator, I would say, oh, it's okay. There's someone already here. We're covered. In this case, it's two different processes, and we'll go through each of them separately. So let's start with the inspection. One important thing to note about the water system inspection is that it focuses purely on your water source. Okay, so if you're irrigating from a pond, it's focused on the pond. If you pull out of a well, it's focused on the well. If you draw water from a river or a creek, that's the source. That's where the attention goes for the inspection. And the inspection has 5 elements. The first of which is real easy. It's just a description of your water source. It's a pond, it's this big, it's a well, it has the casing. It's a very simple description of the source itself and where it is on the property. I think it's smart to include a map with that. The second part of the inspection is you describe what they refer to as the extent of your control over the water source. So think about, is this a water source that I have completely covered by me. Nothing can, enter into it. Nothing can complicate it. For example, a well sealed inside that casing, you've got full control. If it's a pond or if you're pulling out of a river, there are other things that come into play. It's open to the environment. And so, what is the extent of your control over that water source? Think about that and put that down in the inspection. Then describe any hazards on the adjacent or the surrounding lands. Like are there livestock that graze up to the pond that you irrigate out of? Or is there a leach field for a septic system that's, wraps up around your well? What are the hazards that might lie in the surrounding lands? And then the fourth piece is what hazards might come to this source from other users of the source? So if that well that you irrigate out of is also connected to homes on the property, is there any hazard that could flow from the home back to the well and the source of your irrigation water? One way, I think that the FDA sometimes illustrates this is if you're pulling out of a river, you're not the first person to touch that water. There are folks upstream of it. And so, what hazards can you identify that might be entering that water source upstream of you from other users? And then the last thing, and this is where the gold is, explore for a minute the degree of protection that you have. What are the practices and procedures that you have in place to guard that water source from the hazards that you just spent the last few minutes describing? So, 5 things that basically take you through an analysis of your water source and force you to think about where are there risky points? Where are there hazards that might be impacting the quality of my pre-harvest water, my irrigation water? And then you're going to do that every year. So go through this exercise of going to the water source, noting any changes, going through those 5 steps, sign, date, put it in your records. In many ways, what's so great about this different approach to ag water is that it just creates a framework for you to be thoughtful about your system. There is enough going on that it's very easy to take things for granted and move on to the most pressing issue of the day. This approach says every year you need to take a minute and just walk around the pond, do your inspection, note any changes, note any hazards and what you're doing to guard against them, and then you're good. So that's the inspection. Um, Lucky for us, there are tools to make that process a little easier. The Produce Safety Alliance, which is a collaboration between the FDA and Cornell University, they, among many other food safety related resources, they have a set of documents online that basically are all the records you need to keep as part of FSMA compliance, including a template for your water systems inspection. And you can see it here. That QR code will take you to that document with all the records. Let's take a minute and just look at that template in close up. They actually fill it in with a hypothetical farm. And remember, there are 5 elements to the inspection. Well, here's number 1. Describe the water source. Is it a pond? Is it a well? What do you see? What do you notice about it? Second part, what kind of control do you have over that water source? You can see here they say that the pond, well, we partially control it. We're the only ones using it, but it is open to the environment, whereas the well, sealed up, we've got total control. You describe any hazards from adjacent lands and then also hazards that might come from other users or places sort of upstream of you. And then the 5th part, describe what you're doing to protect that water source. Here they talk about ways that they chase off wildlife and berms to filter any surface flow or runoff. All the things that give you the assurance that this water source is safe and protected. And the last thing they have here is a moment where you say, do I have any evidence that this water source is not safe? Obviously, the hope is that if you go through all this process, the answer is nope, it's all good. The yellow and orange bands here, those are just to illustrate that in this example, they have two water sources on this one inspection. In this case, the farm irrigates out of a pond and from a well. So they have the five sort of elements of the inspection for both sources. If you irrigate out of three water sources, great, you got three lines on your template instead of two. Okay, take a breath. That's the inspection part of the protocol for pre-harvest water. And again, you're going to do this every year. It's just becomes a ritual where you take the time to make sure nothing's changed, no new risks, anything that needs to be handled is handled, sign, date, put it in your records. That's the inspection. Let's take a minute to talk about the assessment. This is the other part of the work you do related to your pre-harvest water, your irrigation water. The assessment, confusingly, I got to say, this drives me crazy. The assessment, like the inspection, also has five parts. But it also has a bonus. So look forward to that. We'll get to it in a minute. The big thing to note between the assessment and the inspection is that the assessment covers both the source and the distribution system. So if you're, if you're irrigating out of a pond, right, the inspection was all about the pond, risks to the pond, protections for the pond. In the assessment, you're looking at the pond, but you're also looking at the filters that stand between the pond and your fields. It looks at the pipelines that carry it, and then maybe your sprinklers or your drip lines or whatever it is. It's the whole thing from the source to the crop. So what are the five parts of that assessment? Oh, okay. Quick note here, just like the inspection, you do the assessment every year. Look for any changes, note any new measures that you're putting into place to manage risk, sign, date, put it in your records. So now let's look at the assessment. Easiest way to do yours is going to be actually to use a tool the FDA made. They call it a water system assessment builder. And it's kind of like if anybody's ever used TurboTax to do your taxes, where they say, how much money did you make doing X? And you put in a number. And how much money did you spend on Y? And you put in a number. And you answer a bunch of questions, you get to the end, and voila, you have a completed tax form. This is similar. It just asks you a series of questions. You fill in the blank or choose from a drop-down menu. And when you get to the end, you have your water assessment. It's a very easy tool. I really like this tool. And none of it's saved by the FDA. It's just there for you to then download and put in your records. I have the URL there for the builder. Like the inspection, there is also a template online for the assessment. It's put together by the Produce Safety Alliance. It's part of that same document that covers all the different records related to the produce safety rule. In this case, we'll take a look at the assessment template as a way of understanding the five elements of the assessment. The first element in your assessment is to describe the water source and the distribution system and identify the risks and what you're doing to control those risks. Does that sound familiar? That's the inspection, right? That is the whole thing you do in the inspection. So use your inspection for part one of the assessment. You see here in the template, they ask you to describe the location and the nature of your water source, talk about any risks that might threaten the source, as well as the protections you have in place. All the same stuff you cover in the inspection itself. The only difference is they have a section here too for the distribution part of your water system. So that part you don't already have in your back pocket, you're going to need to do. But again, in this first element, you're simply describing that system of distribution. So that's the first of the five parts in the assessment. Here's the second, water use. How do you use the water? Or more specifically, how do you apply it? So are you doing overhead irrigation, drip irrigation? And the part that I find really cool here is this is a place for you to think about withholding intervals. This is a term for a time period that you insert between the last irrigation and harvest. There's a lot of great science out there that even one day causes a dramatic die-off by pathogens between the last irrigation and harvest, because most of those pathogens don't survive very well out in out in the world, out in the open. And so if you, as a rule, as part of your risk management process, insert a day or 2 days between irrigation and harvest, this is where you would put that. It's evidence that you are thinking about how you're managing risk. I think the idea is that 4 days is like complete, elimination, complete die-off of pathogens that might have come in on irrigation water. Um, I'll just say 4 days is a long time to wait at the height of summer. So, maybe that's not the number that you would choose, but what would you insert? Note that here and make that part of your practice. Third part of the assessment are looking at the crop characteristics. What are the aspects of the crops you grow that might have a degree of risk? So this is like the texture of the crops. Are they smooth and waxy, or are they bumpy and porous and have places where, pathogens could hang out? Where in relationship to the ground and the water is that crop grown? Is it up in the tree canopy or high on a bush? Or is it in the ground receiving irrigation water as it percolates through? Those characteristics of the crop have an implication for the degree of risk. If your farm is anything like ours, you might have 20, 30, in our case, more than 100 different crops. So think about clustering them by, sort of common traits, and think about what, if any, particular risk comes with that sort of cohort of crops. You can see here in this example, they identify leafy greens just as a category. And they say there's no special quality to leafy greens that make them more risky than another crop. And they move on, right? So you're looking for something that distinguishes it as having a higher risk than others. The other element of this third part of the assessment is a question of whether you're harvesting damaged produce or not. Again, speaking for myself, if something's crushed or broken or dying or otherwise, not in good shape, we're not harvesting it because we're not sending that to our customers. But a damaged crop is also a more dangerous crop. And so if you, as a rule, only harvest healthy, whole produce, note that, because that is a characteristic of your crop that is a way of guarding against the entry of risk. So then the fourth element of this assessment, environmental conditions. For most of the season, are you growing in full sun? Are you under shade? Are you growing in a place that's rainy and damp? Or are you, like most of California, in a long, protracted dry spell? Obviously, the hotter, the sunnier, the drier, the more and the faster the die-off of any pathogens that might be in that water. And so those environmental conditions influence the degree of risk inherent to your irrigation system and to the whole system. And then the fifth thing is a catch-all, other factors. Okay. This, as far as I can tell, really the most common thing you might see in other factors is a water test. It's important to note, though, that water testing under FSMA of pre-harvest water is purely optional. It's a data point that can help you establish if maybe there's something going wrong or something that needs addressing, but it is not required because you've gone through all of these other steps to assess any risk that's inherent to your system. So it's not required, but you can do it. And if you do it, here's my suggestion. In terms of you get the test result back and you're thinking, okay, do I have a problem or not? Use the old standard as that dividing line between I'm doing okay or something's amiss and we got to do something about this. Those old standards are kind of grayed out here, but they reference two different measurements of the coliform count in the water sample. Um, if you wanted to test your water source, test your irrigation water, you would capture the results here in this fifth part of the assessment. And again, ideally, it would indicate, whether there's something that needs attention or not. The QR code here is going to take you to some information on our website related to sampling and running water tests. I'll make a couple of quick notes. If you haven't done water testing before, it's not the same as doing a soil test where you can, put it in a Ziploc and mail it to the Midwest or the Central Valley. You need a lab that's local because generally they want you to come to the lab to pick up the vial or the bottle for the sample, and they want to give you some specific instructions for taking it. And then once you take the sample, you got to get it to them within 8 hours of the sampling. So you need to find a lab that's near you, and that QR code will take you to, among other things, a list of some labs that are local here in the North Bay, as well as a site that lists all credited labs in California. Um, it's important when you're getting the test that you are looking at generic E. coli. Okay, that's the indicator, and you want a test that gives you quantitative results. A lot of labs can do a generic E. coli test, and they just tell you whether they found it or not, present or absent, detected, not detected. But in this case, you're looking for evidence that you're below a level that's safe or above that level. So you need quantitative results. You need to know the number of coliform. Um, and then there are some online resources you can use to plug your test results in and see how you compare to those pre-2024 standards for FSMA. So again, that QR code will get you a little more help with your water testing. But again, it's optional, right? This is something you can do as an indicator, but it's not required because you're taking all these other very deliberate, intentional steps to look at all the parts of your water system, identify any risk, and move forward from there. So we have arrived at the promised bonus round. This is the determination of overall risk. Okay, so you've gone through steps 1 through 5 in the assessment. You've inventoried the nature of the system itself, the qualities of the crop, the environment. Maybe you did some testing. You've got a lot of data right now about the relative risk of this whole water system, your irrigation system. Now you assign it what you determine to be its overall risk. And in this case, the FDA is using kind of a red, yellow, green, a stoplight type of system, only because it's the FDA, we get four colors. So red, orange, yellow, and green. So let's take a look at that final step of the assessment. It's at the bottom of the template. So if you're looking at that template from the Produce Safety Alliance, it's right there at the bottom. Zoom in on it, and you'll see that there are 4 possibilities for your determination of risk. Red, high risk, is boom, this water is not safe. For this, we're talking about maybe there are dead animals in your water source, or there is clear human waste going into the water source. You know this is not good. This is not safe. You shut it down, you stop using it, and you don't resume irrigating with it until you've resolved those issues. Okay, that's high risk. That's red. So if the 5 steps of your assessment has led you to a point where you think that's the case here, you stop, you use corrective measures to fix the matter, and then you resume irrigating. But let's assume you're not in that state. Let's say you're here at orange or medium risk, okay? In this case, there is maybe some sort of off-farm activity, meaning it's not as easy for you to control, right? Because it's happening beyond your property. But there's some kind of off-farm use that it represents a risk to your water, and it involves maybe animal waste or human waste, that kind of like really icky stuff that has a really high risk factor. Okay. And the key language here is that one of those things poses or is reasonably likely to introduce pathogens to the water source. Reasonably likely. What does that mean? How do you how do you know if it's reasonably likely? I think of it like a train. If the train is in the station, okay, the pathogen is here. It's not safe. You're in the red, okay? That train has arrived. You know you're in trouble. Reasonably likely means the train is on the track. I don't know where it is. It might get to the station in a week or a month, but you know what? It's going to get here eventually. I see it coming. We all know it's coming. Okay. That's reasonably likely. So if there's something off the farm or and it involves one of these things like human or animal waste, and you know it's coming, it's just bound to happen, that's reasonably likely. And now you're in that medium risk, and that means that you need to resolve the situation soon, certainly within the season. Because, if you're trying to get something done before the train arrives, you don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know when the train's going to get there. So you better get on the stick. Okay. Third option, the yellow option, low risk, means that there's something on the farm, something more easily controlled by you, or maybe something off farm, but it's not that animal waste, human waste thing. Okay. But again, the train's on the track. It's reasonably likely to introduce a pathogen to your water system. Okay. Again, you need to take some measures because you know it's coming. When? Not sure, but it's easy to predict it's going to happen. And so start implementing some mitigations, some mitigating measures, document them, and move on from there. Obviously, then the fourth option for your total determination of risk is green, no risk. And so this means it doesn't mean that nothing's going to ever happen. It means there's no foreseeable risk that's going to introduce a pathogen to your water source. So could something happen? Maybe, but it's not like that train that you know is going to get here and you see it coming. And so that's where you can assign yourself this green condition, where you have no reason to limit the use of your water because there's nothing foreseeable or inevitable or reasonably likely to happen in your water source. Okay, that's the final part of the assessment. Again, you're going to do this every year. Once you do the first one, thereafter, mostly you're just documenting any changes, right? Something new about your system or your crops, or the environment if that's changing dramatically. You're simply updating it, signing it, dating it, putting it in your file. I say that's once a year, but if something were to change mid-year, you want to go through this process again. If the pond went dry and you switch to a well, go through the exercise of running the assessment, reevaluating things, sign, date, put it in your file. So, FSMA, pre-harvest water. Let's talk about post-harvest water. This is essentially for most people, this is the water you use to wash the produce. But like I said earlier, it is also the produce that is involved in cleaning tools, maybe, or washing out harvest crates, or washing down surfaces in your post-harvest area. For the post-harvest water, right out the box, there's a couple of baseline expectations. And one of them, you're not using surface water. Okay. Under FSMA, doesn't matter what kind of filter you're using, you are not to use surface water, pond water, river water, for washing produce post-harvest. Okay. You can use groundwater, treated or even untreated. The key is that it has zero detectable coliforms. Okay, so we said testing was optional in the pre-harvest water, but if you're using a well for your post-harvest water, you got to get a test, and the test has to show no detectable coliforms. So remember, I said some labs they'll do E. coli, that generic E. coli test, and they'll just say detectable, not detectable, present, not present. That's what you need. And you want it to say not present, okay? Because that's the standard. Alternatively, you could use municipal water if that's an option. In that case, you want to have records of, your water bill, and oftentimes municipalities have like water quality standards that they publish. Stick that in your file. But these are just like the baseline expectations for post-harvest water. The other thing is, you guessed it, an annual inspection. Okay. This is the same thing we talked about with pre-harvest water, and you don't have to do the assessment. It's just the inspection. Okay. So the inspection, as a refresher, was the document with the 5 parts where you identify and describe the water source, talk about how much you control it, any risks from adjacent lands or other users of that source, and then all the things you do to protect it. Where the inspection that we looked at earlier had 2 lines because they had 2 water sources for their irrigation water. Could slap on a third line if you have a separate water source for your post-harvest water. Run all the same, questions, keep it in the same document. But you are required to meet those baseline expectations, do the inspection, and do it every year. So um, now we're getting into kind of a little bit of the details of what, for me as a grower, was always the most sort of like anxiety provoking thing: sanitizers. Do I need to use a sanitizer? Do I need to put something in my water? Um, the easy, quick answer is no. You do not have to use sanitizers in your wash water. You need to have wash water like this. It meets those baseline expectations, and you've done your inspection and concluded that there are no risks that jeopardize the safety of the water. Okay. So, the way I think of it is that the sanitizer is the last line of defense in your produce um, safety system. Or another way to think of it is it's like you're the goalkeeper. Okay. When I played soccer as a kid, I was the keeper, and it always felt like the whole thing rested on my shoulders. And when there's, one player bearing down on you, you definitely feel like it's all on your shoulders. But the truth is, it has to get past 10 other players before it gets to the keeper. And similarly, if you have good pre-harvest water management systems, if you are being conscientious with your soil amendments, if you use good harvest practices with people, and when they wash hands and when they wash out harvest tools, if you're doing all of those things right, by the time it gets to the post-harvest area, to the wash and pack area, you don't necessarily need that, that last line of defense. And so, in answer to the question of do I have to use a sanitizer, the answer is no, you do not have to. And I encourage people to ask, why are you thinking about using a sanitizer? And in fact, why are you washing your produce? Oftentimes the answer is it's for part of cooling the produce and maybe part of the quality protection of the produce, right? Keeping it plump and turgid when it goes into the cooler. So maybe you just need to spray it, right? It doesn't need to get dunked. Maybe it gets sprayed and goes into the cooler. Or maybe you're field packing, going straight into cases in the field. And if you're using good practices with harvest crates and box management, they're going right into the crates, and then maybe they're misted or hydro cooled. You're not even going to a dunk tank. And then the question of a sanitizer is irrelevant. So if you're stressing about this question, and I say that because I did as a grower for a long time, let me just say You can do it. Lots of people do because they want that last line of defense, but it's not mandatory. And think about all of the other 10 players that that you have on the field before you get to a dunk tank and this question of whether or not you use a sanitizer. Of course, if you're going to, make sure you do it right. Okay. So choose the right sanitizer for example, your organic certification. Don't use something that's going to jeopardize your status with your organic certifier. And Lucas in the chat earlier mentioned SOPs. If you're using a sanitizer, put it all in an SOP. What's the formulation? If you use a mix for washing harvest knives and harvest crates, what is the proportion of sanitizer to water? And if you use a sanitizer for your dunk tanks, you're going to have a different formulation. Write both of those down, train your people, make sure everybody's following those standards, and you're good to go. There are some sanitizers that require that you do a final rinse through potable water after using the sanitizer. So make sure you're doing that and make sure you're getting rid of that, the water with the sanitizer in the correct way. This QR code will take you to some resources on our page that include different sanitizers and different ways of using them. One of my favorite tools that's on that page is this comes from the Produce Safety Alliance, and it's this long list of all the sanitizers that are labeled by the EPA for use in a produce operation. And down the left side, you've got all the different products. And then it shows for each one, is it labeled for use in a pre-harvest situation, basically in irrigation water, or can you use it in post-harvest situations like for food contact surfaces or in the dunk tank? And it even has a column for whether or not it's OMRI certified or OMRI listed. So this is a great document. If you feel like you want that and need that last line of defense, you want to keep her in the box, okay? Check out this spreadsheet, look for a material that lines up with your needs, and then get it all down in an SOP, stick it in your food safety plan. Um, it's good practice. It doesn't matter where you fit with FSMA. It's just how you probably should be doing business to protect your customers and protect your operation. All right, so we touched on FSMA. We went deep on pre-harvest water. Then we got out of the pre-harvest water and got into the post-harvest water. We've got a little bit of time left here. Let's get into some questions. Put it in the chat. Come off mic, ask it aloud. I'm going to put my information up here, and that way, if you can't stay for questions, or maybe something comes to your mind later, reach out to me, okay? Send me an email, give me a call. When I do these webinars with AIM, I make myself available to the larger AIM family. So even if you're not in Marin, okay, pick up the phone and I'm happy to field a question.
Great. I think it looks like we had one come through in the chat. I'll also just mention I just launched a super short feedback survey. If folks could fill that out, that helps us know what we're doing well and what we can do better. But looks like David had a question about can you discuss use of recycled/treated sewage water on organic farms to irrigate produce that will be eaten raw? Does FSMA still apply or do other agencies regulate this?
Yes. Okay. Oh, David, so I've got to tell you something. I did not come to this webinar cold, all right? Like I went to some of the folks that I rely on and for information related to food safety and water, and I asked this very question. I know in parts of Sonoma County and other parts of the state, folks are using recycled water for irrigation. My understanding is that it would be treated like untreated groundwater. Okay. Um, but you could also treat it like surface water. Either way, what you want to be doing is you want to do the inspection for that system, at least the part that you can see and control, and identify risks that maybe are inherent to that system from upstream of you. Um, do both the inspection and the assessment, because again, all of these questions about is there a risk, where is the risk, and how do I mitigate that risk, they all apply. Um, to my knowledge, it is not expressly forbidden for use in irrigation. It would not be allowed for post-harvest. I'm 99% sure of that. And so if you're thinking about using that recycled water for wash and pack, I would suggest shifting to another source. I don't have a 100% certainty on that, but my understanding is that it would not be acceptable because it isn't potable. And it probably couldn't be approved, even if you tested it for zero coliform, just because of the nature of the system. So that's my best answer to that question, both as regards pre-harvest use and post-harvest. But you know what? Reach out to me. I'm happy to go a little bit deeper and get to that 100% certainty if you're really hoping to use that recycled water for post-harvest.
Great. Maybe let's see if there's one more question. I know we're coming right up to 4 o'clock, and I want to respect everyone's time. If not, you can also contact information's on the screen. You can also reach out to me. I'll send out an email after this with slides and additional information for folks so that hopefully you can keep getting your questions answered.
There isn't one more question. I can't believe people um, don't have something burning. Water and food safety in general has always been something for me as a grower that just put my teeth on edge. And if ever there's a place to ask that question safely, this is one.
I'll throw a question out that I think might be useful in sort of perpetuity, which is if I'm a producer and I discover in my inspection and in my assessment that something that I'm doing for whatever reason is misaligned with what's expected from FSMA, what should I do? Obviously, I shouldn't panic, but who can I reach out to? What should be my next steps?
Yeah. So a lot of the resources that I've linked to throughout this presentation, including the UC Davis, the Small Farm Food Safety Program, and their Post-Harvest Technology Program, um, have great resources about treating your pre-harvest water. For example, if you identify there's a problem and you need to do something to fix it. In fact, I think one of the webinars is just about some of the different options and technologies for getting your pre-harvest water up to a standard where it needs to be. Um, then also, the folks at UC Davis are on the cusp of implementing a program where they can send someone out to work with you and do an assessment of your farm and your food safety practices. Historically, the CDFA offered a service where they could come out and essentially do a FSMA style produce safety rule inspection. But I don't think many people took him up on it because the CDFA is the organization that also does the real inspection. And it's a
Right.
little awkward to ask folks to come out and think that somehow they're not going to hold it against you if they see a problem. So folks at UC Davis are working on a program to be able to come out and do those kinds of things. And that would be a great way to get a specific answer to the specific situation that you're up against. But some of the resources on their website already are are great solutions to common issues in a water system. And honestly, for example, if you've got a well that you're using, your well outfit is a great resource for you. Generally, when they put in a well, they do what's called an ag suitability test. And that's looking at, hazards inherent to the water, usually that compromise the quality of a crop or the health of a crop. But they also have the ability to test for other things. And certainly, if they're putting in a well that's going to be used for domestic water, they have to show that it's potable, that there is no E. coli. And so that can be a resource that may be already out on the farm on a regular basis don't be afraid to ask them questions, talk about the standard that you're trying to meet, and see what kind of solutions they might have in their pocket.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic answer to a very general question. Well, we're right at 4:03, which is just a full hour since we got started. So I think we can wrap up here. Thank you again, Vince, for this presentation. I really appreciate it. I'm sure our folks enjoyed it as well. If y'all have questions, you can email Vince at the email here. You can also email me, jack@agriculturalinstitute.org, and I will connect you with the right resource.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.